All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. Hope you all having a good day so far. So I'm continuing the journey of going through the oldest member requests for reactions as I can, and this is the next one that has been waiting the longest. This one is titled, Did Jordan's 90s Rank Highest? Ranking the modern era's 80s through 2010s. This is from a channel called Goatcast Hoops, which I am subscribed to and I have reacted to before. And yeah, at this point, this one's probably been sitting in queue for about 2 months, maybe more. And I apologize, but I'm doing my best to go back. You know, you guys have noticed over the last couple of weeks, I'm going back as much as I can to basically go ahead and get through this, because it's hard when like there's so much going on at once. I keep wanting to react to like the newest stuff, but I gotta keep this up, at least keep a balance going. So anyways, shout out to you members. I appreciate you guys, and this is my way of showing my appreciation. So thank you very much for all your support, guys. Let's do this. I'm linking the original video down below in the description, like always. And then you'll see the list of all the channel members. I appreciate you all. Guys, like the video if you could, and it helps out a lot. Please hit that like button, and let's rock. Let's go. Breaking down the decades, 80s versus 90s.
Thinking of the talented players and teams throughout certain eras, I thought it would be interesting to take a look through some of the current eras and give my thoughts on the good and bad from each, and in the end, give my opinion on which decade was best.
Okay.
Now, I know the NBA spans way beyond the eras I'm going to talk about. Since how I've been around for 40, I'm going to do eras in the last 40 years.
That's cool, man. So, yeah, we're the same age, basically. Then we've witnessed the same basketball. Let's rock.
80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. Today, we'll discuss the 80s and 90s, and I will drop the 2000s and 2010s shortly after. So some may be wondering how I'm going to score this. I'm going to try to keep it fairly simple. I'll look at the champions and their legacy in the association, the parity during those years. Were the titles won by one conference, or was it back and forth affair? Then I'll take a look at the prime players of those years and their impact on the game. Of course, because of how this works, some players will overlap decades, so we'll take that into account, but we'll focus on either their championship years or their best/award-winning years. The 80s were quite the decade. Most will agree that this was the decade that catapulted the NBA into prominence as one of the major sports leagues in the U.S.
I mean, it's not even like a conversation to have. Like, the proof is in the pudding. The numbers, all the tickets sold, it being live on TV, like it's all there. It's not even a theory. It's fact.
Mostly on the backs of two men and two teams. Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics, as well as, of course, Magic Johnson and the Showtime Los Angeles Lakers.
Yep.
Speaking of those Showtime... And
then we throw in the merger with the ABA and guys like Dr. J and Moses coming in. Yep. Everything was firing on all cylinders here. And then a young Michael Jordan coming in, which we're about to get into probably. Coming in 84, life was good.
Lakers, they were the definition of a dynasty. Being a part of 8 of the 10 NBA finals throughout the 80s. And bringing home 5 Larry O'Brien trophies during those trips. Larry's Celtics were not far behind, spending half the decade in the NBA Finals and bringing home 3 rings. The Moses Malone's Philadelphia Sixers and Isaiah Thomas' Detroit Pistons rounded out the other champions throughout that decade. You don't get more legendary than those teams. Los Angeles Lakers having, who many believe, the greatest point guard ever in Irvin Magic Johnson, teamed with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the already legend of the league, who while his time was dwindling, was still able to be a major force on the court.
For sure.
Add in Tar Heel and all-star small forward James Worthy, and there you have one of the all-time greatest teams in the history of the league.
Thank you for mentioning James Worthy, man. He needs more mentions.
Led by Hall of Fame coach Pat Riley. On the other side of the field were those green and white wearing Boston Celtics, led by Hall of Famer Larry Bird, and anchored by greats Dennis Johnson, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, among others. Finally, those much-hated bad boy Detroit Pistons with point guard great Isaiah Thomas, his bodyguards Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn,
bodyguards,
and sidekicks Joe Dumars and Vinnie Johnson. Please don't copy his shooting style. Those teams basically ruled the 80s, with Moses Malone's Sixers powering their way in at times. The parity was split for the most part, with the West taking home 5 and also being dominated by the Lakers and Boston, Detroit, and Philly on the East taking 3, 1, and 1 respectively.
For sure.
The 80s will probably be remembered.
Yeah, it was Philly and Boston in the early half of the decade, and then Detroit pretty much took Philly's place in the second half of the decade.
Some as a boring era outside of those flashy Lakers and Celtics. as the NBA was still an inside-outside game of fundamentals back then. While you may see a 3-ball shot at times, it was nowhere near a staple of the game, and those that shot it were basically considered specialists, and that was one of their only jobs on the court. The days of the athletic build were starting to pour into the league, but as some like to call them, plumbers and construction worker body types were still running rampant on most NBA teams.
I mean, everyone from the 80s will say back then, the 3-ball was a tactic if you need to cut the lead. You know, say you're down by 9 and there's like 2 minutes left, time to shoot a 3 or 2. But outside of that, yeah, go for the better percentage shot.
And with teams loaded to the brim like the Lakers and Celtics, box scores look like those of today, surprisingly, with much slower bigs roaming the paint and more athletic or ball-moving teams being able to exploit those advantages. Also, the fact that the league was only comprised of 23 teams at that time, so when a team got a solid combination of players, they usually stayed with that squad for a while, meaning that only the best of the best filled out rosters with less teams available. These were also the years where the NBA got its reputation for having tough defense, basically meaning you'd almost have to concuss another player for them to call anything beyond a regular foul during those days.
Yeah, this is the era I would argue they were a little too lenient on this. That's why I say the 90s is where they figured it out, rules-wise.
And fist flying normally just meant a common technical, unlike today where a common touch foul can lead to ejection and multiple game suspension if the refs see it wrong. Oh yeah. And in 1984, with the 3rd pick in the draft, the Chicago Bulls drafted some guy named Michael Jordan. Yeah, a guy that went to Boston Garden in 86 and dropped 63 on the soon-to-be champion Boston Celtics. The guy that won the NBA MVP in his 4th season. Also the guy that won the NBA scoring title every year from 1987 to 1993.
10 times.
But we'll discuss him a little later.
Yeah, I mean, he's all right. He's a pretty decent basketball player.
So let's grade the 80s era, and we'll grade each category out of 5 basketballs. Champions, 5 basketballs. Some of the greatest teams ever assembled in basketball. Parity, with the West and East splitting championships 5 and 5, I'll go 4.5 basketballs. Prime players, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas, Moses Malone, young Michael Jordan, young Charles Barkley, Dominique Wilkins. That's a who's who of greats.
Yeah, it's so great that we got freaking Dr. J not even getting mentioned. That's how great it is. And that's not a criticism. It's a good era.
I'll be somewhat bullish in this and say 4 basketballs. So 1980s average, 4.5 basketballs. The 90s, oh boy.
Yeah.
The 90s aren't just memorable because of who I'm about to talk about. They can best be described as the year the NBA went global, becoming a worldwide spectacle.
Absolutely.
Those are the years I really got into basketball as a preteen and teenager, so my intrigue and love for watching the game was at its peak. The 90s era can pretty much be called the Michael Jordan era. Even though he was a major deal in the mid to late 80s, it was this decade where he and those Bulls put together the blueprint to dominate a decade.
Absolutely.
Chicago Bulls, led by Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Coach Phil Jackson, basically owned the 90s, bringing home 6 of the 10 championships in those years. I even think they could have snatched 2 more, another cheap plug. But that's just headcanon. So let's move along.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we can argue about that all day, and we all have.
Alpha Isaiah and the Pistons led to a chip in 1990, while the Houston Rockets with Hakeem Olajuwon firmly in his prime took home back-to-back rings in 94 and 95, and the Twin Towers of Tim Duncan and David Robinson won in 1999 with the San Antonio Spurs. If you watch my channel, you've heard me talk about those 90s Bulls many times, but if you haven't, they're easily one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, and the 95-96 iteration, bringing in Dennis Rodman to round out a big 3, is basically considered the greatest team of all time.
Yeah.
Jordan through those years collected plenty more.
I still put my vote in for 92 Bulls, but I'm with you. I'm with you here.
Hardware, grabbing 4 more NBA MVPs, 6 Finals MVPs, and a host of All-NBA bids. Unfortunately, many of the legendary superstars of that time had to watch Jordan hoist trophies from the sidelines, unlike the back and forth of great vibes.
There's my 93 Suns moment. All right.
Title in the 80s.
Damn.
Greats like Charles Barkley, Karl Malone.
By the way, KJ's been making the rounds and doing podcasts lately, and I've been loving it. I've been watching him late at night. Good to hear this guy talking again, talking hoops.
Clyde Drexler.
His Jordan stories are hilarious, man. Like him talking about having to him hearing the news that he has to guard Jordan in the finals on game 3. He's like, it's the funniest thing ever. It's like he was living a nightmare.
Patrick Ewing and Sean Kent fought tooth and nail to get a hold of the Larry O'Brien trophy, but like a Dikembe Mutombo finger wag, No.
No.
Look at the 90s, you'll probably see some glaring differences from the 80s. While there are those that just see the players from the 80s and think low scoring, the 90s were really the era of plotting low scoring game. There could be many reasons why, but from memory and just the eye test, the evolution of the player continued, and in this era, the agile, athletic centers ruled much of the game unless your name was Michael Jeffrey Jordan. Guys like Prime Hakeem, David Robinson, young Shaquille O'Neal, Alonzo Mourning, even Patrick Ewing could step away from the deep paint and put a hand in your face.
Yep.
The 90s also could be considered the next expansion era, as the most expansion since the ABA merger came to be with teams like the Charlotte Hornets, Miami Heat, Minnesota Timberwolves, and Orlando Magic.
Speaking of which, it looks like Seattle's finally going to get their team back. Congratulations. Well earned.
Getting their
About
start
time.
in the late 80s, but had their major beginnings in the 90s. Some even argue the league was a bit diluted during these years due to expansion. Tough defense, the same tough defense I spoke about in the 80s, was at an even higher level. Hand checking and no defensive 3 seconds meant getting to the basket and making perimeter shots were even harder.
Yep.
The physicality was
Hence the lower scoring. Oof.
all-time high, with players literally being bigger, stronger, and faster during these days. The 3-ball was still a shot meant for specialists, but more and more perimeter players began to take it, although the NBA moved it further back in the late 90s. Also, the 90s is where the big men began to step out a little further away from the basket and attempt mid-range shots a lot more regularly. Hakeem, David Robinson, even Ewing would torch teams whose bigs were too slow and whose wings weren't big enough to stop them from shooting over them.
Absolutely.
With more athletic players and less specific defensive rules, tons of fouls and slow burn games were the norm in that decade.
Yeah, shout out to Patrick Ewing. He tested that range. He wasn't at like that 3-ball range, but he was deep in there, like deep twos, fadeaway turnaround jump shots. Beautiful.
Though interest was at its highest due to you-know-who. In fact, the 1998 NBA Finals is the highest rated finals ever, and the current eras haven't even been close to that.
Yep, that was the
Let's
peak.
rate the 90s. Champions, 4.5 basketballs. I have to be honest, besides the Bulls, the Rockets had a great team, but I wouldn't rank those Rocket teams in the pantheon of legendary teams. Underrated though, but not even close compared to those great teams in the 80s. Parity, 4 basketballs. You can analyze and research, but it comes down to the reality. The Eastern Conference took home 7 of the 10 championships through those years. As said, the new expansion teams blending into the conferences could have caused some lack of parity, as 4 new teams had to have talent stretch their way in the early 90s, and the Toronto Raptors and Vancouver Grizzlies, now in Memphis, came in the mid-90s, leaving some teams not being able to team stars with lots of talent. However, you still had some outstanding teams on both sides, with teams like the Knicks, Pacers, and later Heat and Magic making the East a dogfight, and out west the Rockets, Jazz, Sonic, Suns, Trailblazers, all being exceptional.
And that would be my argument against the expansion teams diluting it. And this normally doesn't happen, but it did here. Almost take away like Vancouver, but like almost all the other expansion teams in this era, within a year or two, they were playoff teams. Surprisingly.
Happened to be in the NBA while those Bulls teams were still together. Prime players, 5 basketballs.
Love it.
Prime Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, Hakeem Olajuwon, Scottie Pippen, Karl Malone, David Robinson, young, raw, but still a superstar Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing, John Stockton, young Tim Duncan, Clyde Drexler. I can keep going.
Yeah, I know.
I think you get the point.
Yeah, I do.
1990s
For sure.
average, 4.5 as well. I know there'll be some very pro 1990s people and some pro 80s, but I see them on par with each other for very different reasons. I feel the star power in the 90s surpasses those of the 80s, only because of how media began to spotlight players a lot more in the 90s than 80s. So if you weren't certain players, you had to watch the game to really see who was who on the court.
That's a good point. Yeah. NBA programs like NBA Inside Stuff and whatever like that helped identify for a lot of people who the major players in the NBA were in the 90s. We didn't have anything like that in the 80s.
Championship teams from both are some of the greatest squads of all time. So with the Bulls having maybe the greatest team, I had to rank the 90s fairly high. Then the parity, I could really drop the rating for the 90s, but because the Bulls were so dominant, didn't mean there weren't some tough teams in both conferences. And if you watch those playoffs, the years Michael was retired, it was anyone's ball game those years.
Yep. I like this because these are my 3 favorite eras in basketball. And I kind of define it all as the golden era, but like the 90s being the heart of the golden era.
NBA was the most exciting. had the most parity, and shaped the game to be a global phenomenon? Those are the questions I'm setting out to answer in this series, where I take a look at the eras throughout the last 40 years in the NBA. If you happen to miss part 1, cheap plug, I will link it in the description, as I spoke about the league in the 1980s and 1990s and gave them a grade. I think some will be surprised how those decades/eras panned out. So today, let's talk about the last 2 full decades, which in terms of the evolution of basketball, I feel are their own eras in themselves. The 2000s and the 2010s. While both had elements of decades before, these years were very transitional for the league in many ways, on and off the court. So to continue these comparisons, a quick rundown of how the scoring will go. I'll look at the champions and their legacy in the association, the parity during those years, were the titles won by one conference mostly, or was it a back and forth affair? Then I'll take a look at the prime players of those years and their impact on the game. Of course, because of how this works, some players will overlap decades, so I will take that into account, but we will focus on either their championship years or their best/award-winning years.
Okay.
So today, we will discuss the NBA eras ranging from the 2000s and the 2010s. The 2000s were a decade that laid the foundation of what the association would eventually become today. From the overall company to the product to the players to the rules. With the internet and advancement in all forms of media, things were bound to reflect that progression. David Stern of the league as a whole was reeling from the retirement of Mr. GOAT himself, Michael Jordan, and the dismantling of that historic Chicago Bulls team, and needed a spark to keep and gain interest in the game moving forward. Here's a quote from Mark Cuban when speaking on the 2000s in the NBA. The 2000s was also a time when almost every NBA team was losing money.
Wow.
A lot of money. And teams' values were declining.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So it's natural for a company who through the 80s and 90s grew dependent on stars and superstars to sell the game, to struggle with one of its biggest names ever left and one of their most popular teams disbanded. In came the 2000s Los Angeles.
I mean, how lucky were we as basketball fans that when Michael Jordan was heading out, Kobe was rising? Like, I didn't appreciate it that enough while it was happening, but we got so lucky. We could have had to wait like 30 more years to see a talent like that, but it happened right away. It was really, really cool. Really lucky.
Rising once again after their dormancy in the 90s. Lakers now with Phil Jackson, fresh off his extremely successful coaching career through the 90s, decided to try to tame even more egos in the massive Shaquille O'Neal and the rising Kobe Bryant. The 2000s, champions-wise, would be a war between Western Conference powerhouses. Those early Lakers with Shaq and later prime Kobe's Lakers and the Tim Duncan-led San Antonio Spurs, continuing their success from the late 90s. These two franchises will combine for 7 of the championship runs throughout the 2000s, with the Detroit Pistons with Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace bullying a ring from the Lakers.
Yes, sir.
Meanwhile, the 2006 Miami Heat with the young Dwayne Wade and fresh from LA Shaq would grab one, and the groundbreaking super team, the 2008 Boston Celtics, brought another Larry O'Brien to Boston. The West would take back their supremacy in the NBA throughout this decade, bringing home 7 out of the 10 championships throughout those years.
This is the era of the Eastern Conference, which is so funny because when you go, because he's going piece by piece here. The 90s, complete opposite compared to this. The 90s was where it was at with the East. And in the 2000s, the West was all that mattered. The East was like a cliff note, unless you're the 04 Pistons.
Having the parity pendulum swing from the 90s. While I won't spend much time on the return that probably shouldn't have happened, the repackaged Washington Wizards, leaving behind their Bullets moniker due to the negative connotation associated with it and the rising violence across the country, had a new regime which consisted of part owner and head of basketball operations, the GOAT himself, Michael Jordan. With his new role and the competitive bug getting the best of him, he returned in the 2001-2002 season as a member of the Wizards and wasn't necessarily bad, but not many will look back on his Wizards tenure and use it in any GOAT debate.
But that's Jordan don't even care about the GOAT debate. I don't care about that, dude. It was a blessing. It was a gift to watch these 2 seasons, man.
Flashes of his former greatness, Jordan would have an okay return in that season, though injuries hampered him, and the next season saw Father Time lace up his Jordan brand kicks and really lock down the once nearly unstoppable shooting guard and finally send him to retirement for good.
Yeah, he got to say goodbye. So GOAT debate, all that crap aside, that's for us. That's for us to talk about. That's not for him. For him, look, he got to say goodbye to the game. He got to say goodbye to the fans. This is where it was at. He didn't get that option, and to be the greatest of all time and not get the option to say goodbye, to do a farewell tour, all that stuff, that was just stupid. You all know I'm not a LeBron James fan by any means, but should he get a retirement tour? Yeah, he should. He should. Any of the all-time greats should. They shouldn't just be like, well, we're blowing up the team. Bye-bye. Thanks for your service. Bulls messed that up so bad.
The 2000s would unfortunately be known for one of the most controversial league-shaking events the NBA has ever seen. The Malice in the Palace. In 2004, a heated game between the Indiana Pacers and hard-nosed Detroit Pistons would change the game forever. After a scuffle between controversial figure Ron Artest and big man Ben Wallace, while the rest were trying to figure out the penalties between the players, a fan threw a drink at Ron Artest and a player-fan brawl ensued. While I'm not going to recap everything, then Commissioner David Stern laid out strict changes for the league to keep those types of heated exchanges to a minimum, and even dress codes to attempt to move the league into what he deemed a more professional light. The 2000s would also be the years that began the foreign player expansion.
Yeah, when did the dress code thing disappear, by the way?
Led by Dirk Nowitzki, who had been drafted late in the 90s, a new era of drafted stash players would become the norm, as the game continued to take efforts to globalize its fan base. We saw great foreign players like Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Yao Ming, the aforementioned Dirk, Peja Stojakovic, the Gasol brothers, among others, revolutionizing the game by introducing the Eurostep and changing the tried and true use of the big man, having near 7-footers taking shots from the three-point line at a much larger clip. The league would also try to speed the game up even more from the plodding 90s, shortening the time to advance the ball over half court and changing the defense, creating the defensive 3-second rule.
Oh, yeah, that's true. They shifted from 10 seconds to 8 seconds here, huh?
The arm
and that was to encourage speeding up the pace. See, a rule like that I can get behind. To speed up the pace, you hopefully get more scoring. I agree with that kind of a strategy. You got 2 less seconds, go. I don't agree with all the you can't play defense anymore, so the score goes up. You know, like where we are now. Like, I get in the 2000s, it was time to like up the scoring a little bit. Fine. If you're the commissioner, I can understand that point of view. But why didn't we ever stop? Like, the points are far beyond too high now. Like, so why didn't we just slow it down? Instead, now we need a massive correction to go back to where it should be.
A illegal defense rule while allowing zone defense for teams. The continued evolution of the athlete played a major part in the 2000s as well, as the agile center was still very much a prominent figure, but with the zone defenses being allowed and the speeding up of the game, teams would at times sacrifice size for agility and speed, with prime wings being some of the star athletes of that time like Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash, Allen Iverson, Tracy McGrady, Jason Kidd, Dwayne Wade, and oh yeah, some kid from Akron, Ohio, drafted #1 by his home state, one of the greatest of all time, LeBron James, taking over the mantle that Mike had left in the 90s and keeping the NBA as one of, if not the top sports league worldwide. Also, with advanced technologies came analytics. Now with the ability for many to watch footage on more than one media, stat nerds can analyze the game and come up with metrics, such as box plus minus, as well as player efficiency ratings, PER, created by John Hollinger, to rate a player's on-court productivity. All of these help shape the league as a foundation of what we see today. So how would I rate the 2000s out of 5 basketballs? Champions, 4 basketballs. I feel while exceptional teams, the Spurs teams just never captivated the fans, so those runs didn't have the appeal of past great teams like the 80s Lakers or 90s Bulls.
That's a very valid point. Even though, like, I think we would all agree respect-wise, the Spurs have our respect for what they accomplished. They were boring as hell for the average basketball fan to watch. I get it. You have to really love basketball to be entertained by what they're doing, because it's just such beautiful team basketball, what they were accomplishing. So probably people felt the same way about the Pistons when they won in 2004. Probably not the best style of basketball they were looking for, but I loved it, man.
While the Shaq Kobe Lakers did bring some prime time, outside of the Lakers and Celtics revitalizing their longtime feud late in the 2000s, the champions of this time are often pretty forgettable, such as the Pistons team and even the 2006 Heat, who I believe should still thank the refs for that chip. Parity for basketball.
Yeah, it's the popular opinion. I gotcha.
Phenomenal teams throughout the 2000s, some I didn't even talk about in the breakdown, such as the New Jersey Nets, Sacramento Kings with Chris Webber and company, Dirk's Dallas
Talk
Mavericks.
About getting ripped off. They got ripped off. The Sacramento Kings, I think, other than maybe the Phoenix Suns, they got ripped off the most. Both teams got ripped off.
team and Mike D'Antoni's 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns, who really sped the game up for entertainment.
Yep.
But it just seemed like every year for many years, it could go to either the Spurs or Lakers and just insert an Eastern Conference team in there. Prime players, 4.5 basketball.
I mean, I like it because we actually got the ability there for a short window of a few years to see my Phoenix Suns with their explosive offense and fast-paced game versus the San Antonio Spurs with their slow pace, but just methodical, brilliant team basketball and fantastic defense. Who won every time? Even though you can debate that the Suns should have won one, and I would. The Spurs, man. The Spurs won more than we did. Then they were winning championships. So who really won that debate as far as what style of basketball is better? I think the Spurs' slower pace, that wins the battle as far as which is better. But now we're just all across the board fast-paced.
Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, Dirk Nowitzki, Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming, Allen Iverson, Kevin Garnett, Shaquille O'Neal, Dwight Howard, young LeBron James. I could keep going, but there's just a few of the absolute stellar players that came through the 2000s. So the 2000 average is 4.2 basketballs. Now the 2010s, an era that we are not far removed from. The 2010s, I feel, began what we now know as the new norm for the NBA and basketball, period. It's all about the 3-ball.
Yep.
We can name this decade/era several things. The tale of traveling LeBron, and no, not the infraction he rarely gets called for, the Dynasty Warriors, or the era of the 3. Any of those fit that 10-year run and basically break down the years to come. After Kobe and the Lakers vanquished the Boston Celtics and got their revenge from 2008, the 2010s saw one of the biggest events to change the current landscape.
I think this is where it died. For me, this is the moment. Like right after this championship, like the game I love went a whole different direction.
Self-proclaimed king LeBron James made a huge decision and took his talents to South Beach and followed the 08 Celtics lead and created a super team alongside D-Wade and Chris Bosh. The old guard remained steady to start the decade as Dirk, with the past his prime Jason Kidd, Jason Terry, Sean Marion, the Dallas Mavericks, smoked the new super team with LeBron and crew.
Yep.
The Heat would finally find their footing and grab Larry O'Brien from out west and bring it back to the Eastern Conference. LeBron in the 2010s was a force and firmly cemented himself as the face of the NBA. He also collected a nice collection of hardware during those years. With LeBron being the face of the league during this time, he just didn't have the full mystique of Jordan and those Bulls. As every time it seemed LeBron had ascended to that mythical, unstoppable level, his contemporaries brought him crashing back down to earth as the 2014 Spurs handed out one of the most one-sided beatdowns in NBA.
By the way, if you don't know, he's mad because Kawhi Leonard's checking back into the game and he's been shutting him down all series.
History. With Tim Duncan's career winding down and a new quiet assassin beginning his rise in Kawhi Leonard leading the effort. And then the evolution came in the form of a young team built on the draft, tough coaching, and a stylistic change that blended systems like Coach Pop's ball movement with Mike D'Antoni's quick and speedy offense. The Golden State Warriors through the second half of the 2010s created what could have been one of the best dynasties in a few generations and completely changed the way teams constructed their rosters to this day. I'll get into some of that later in this breakdown, but with all that said, Golden State continued the success the Western Conference found and won 3 rings from 2015 to 2019. With LeBron returning to a revamped Cleveland Cavaliers with young star Kyrie Irving and bringing in Kevin Love, the beast from the Timberwolves, to construct a team that put together possibly the greatest comeback in a championship series ever. Finally, the East got a lucky break to close the decade as the Toronto Raptors, with their new acquisition, the aforementioned Kawhi Leonard, was able to bring Canada their first NBA chip.
The biggest shocker of all of the whole era was that. Still can't believe it happened. Toronto Raptors, expansion team in the 90s, they won a damn championship before my Suns did. Wow.
Chip parity. Well, once again, the Western Conference continued their dominance from the 2000s, winning 6 of the 10 championships in that decade. These were the years that the Eastern Conference was dubbed the Leastern Conference, as the Boston Celtics began to grow old, and it seemed the newer upstarts like the Chicago Bulls with Derrick Rose, Pacers with Paul George, and Knicks with Carmelo Anthony could never put a solid run together, whether it was injuries or just the inability to get past those LeBron-led teams. The 2010s basically ushered in positionless basketball. The rosters you see now, whether in the NBA, AAU, or school basketball, can thank this decade for the new way coaches and organizations think. As analytics advanced even further from the 2000s, teams and experts could now run numbers and find spots on the floor that had a higher percentage of being effective and thus bringing in players that could fit those roles. The bigs typically being slower and less agile than more compact players, as well as the continued evolution of the athlete that happens throughout these decades. Teams began to roll out 5 guys that may have the height differential of an inch or two, and each being able to essentially play all 5 or at least 4 positions and fit wherever needed on the court.
And this is where the unique talent that we used to see and really cherish, it kind of ended, and it's a lot because of analytics. Because just like you said, now you can plug and play anybody who has certain skills. You shoot good from this wing? Oh, cool. We got a job for you. You know what I mean? That's all you got to do. Stand there on the wing, shoot the ball. You know what I mean? And that guy's out. We can interchange you with somebody else. So, yeah, the unique characters right now in the NBA are all coming from Europe. And that's the reason, because they're not being trained to just do the one thing, you know, because the analytics dictate so.
This is why a team, Golden State, with a center only 6'7", was called the death lineup, due to their ability to swarm offenses with lanky and quick guards and wings, creating easy buckets and not needing to slow down for bigs to get in place. With most teams spreading the floor to the max, you can at least say that defense is a little more complex and strategic nowadays than the days of the 5-position roles of old. While LeBron James became the face of the NBA, it was a babyface kid who made a name for himself with an incredible NCAA March Madness run with his Davidson team.
Yeah, this is the guy who has influenced and inspired a whole new generation to play the game of basketball.
Changed the way kids and even up-and-coming athletes studied the game, with analytics proving that the three-point shot was actually slightly more efficient than long mid-range jumpers. No longer a role designed for 1 or 2 players on the team, it was now an essential part of almost every player's repertoire. Steph taking it to another level, learning from his father, the famous three-point specialist Dell Curry, and perfecting the shot with nearly pinpoint accuracy from almost anywhere beyond the half-court logo, and even at times from there. Now if you go to your local AAU tournaments or high school games, teams are constructed with at least 3 guys that can shoot the 3. Also, players began their own movement of teaming up with other stars in hopes of quickly gaining championship success. As noted, LeBron, D-Wade, and Chris Bosh did it. We saw the newly located Brooklyn Nets attempt it with Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Joe Johnson, and Darren Williams.
Too old at that point.
Chris Paul joining Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan to create Lob City. Minimal success. However, the boldest move came with Kevin Durant. Considered one of the best scorers in the NBA throughout those years, joined forces with the already successful Golden State Warriors to create a God mode for an already OP team.
That's just sad. He joined a team that beat him.
As mentioned, snagging titles in the process. Prime players during those days are many of the guys that are still holding on. LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Chris Paul, Kyrie Irving, Carmelo Anthony, Derrick Rose, James Harden, who I haven't even mentioned, but I'd be here forever detailing every player of that era. Young Anthony Davis and Giannis Antetokounmpo, as well as some of the old guard fading into the pastures such as Dirk, Kobe, D-Wade, and Tim Duncan. So rating the 2010s, champions, 4.5 basketballs. Even though the West controlled the rings for the most part, there were some great teams to come out of that decade with championships. From the 2011 Dallas Mavericks getting revenge over their 2006 failure, the Heat back-to-back wins with the nail-biter in 2013, Duncan getting one more and us getting to witness the beautiful basketball Spurs, showing that just having talented players won't always get you to the top, and of course those Warrior teams and the epic 2016 Cleveland Cavs. Parity, 3.5 basketballs. When you dub one conference the Eastern Conference, doesn't really feel like a lot of equality.
Yeah.
While the West had some wild.
And that's why the whole idea, LeBron went to so many finals. Dude, yeah, he did it when he was in the East, the Eastern Conference. That's why it's just so weird. You know, like if it was out of the West in the 2000s or something, okay, cool. You know, because at that point you could be like, dude, yeah, the Western Conference Finals for probably like 15 years there, that was the NBA Finals for the most part for most of us. That was the battle we were waiting for. So nobody cared who was coming out of the East. The East sucked. So, yeah, LeBron got to go to a lot of finals when he was in the East. He's been in the West now for 8 years, and he's been to the finals once in 8 years. That's the difference. That's more like the reality of what it would have been like.
Fight for the first half. Once the Warriors emerged, the only question was, will they play LeBron again? Prime players, 5 basketballs. Some really spectacular and game changers during this decade. The Continued evolution of LeBron, Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and up-and-coming monsters Anthony Davis and Giannis proves that the decade was stocked full of big names and stars. So the 2010s average is 4.3. So yes, I have the 2010s slightly above the 2000s with my metric, and I will live by that. I think the drastic change from the 2000s and 2010s as far as positionless basketball and the analytic of relying heavily on the three boosted some of the interest, if not at least for a few years. As it's progressed to today, it has created a somewhat less exciting product as watching guys jack up threes for 3 or 4 quarters gets redundant. I still have one more in the series where I will rank the eras from least favorite to favorite.
Like, this is just a mockery. This is just making a mockery of the game of basketball, doing stuff like this.
Less exciting product as watching guys jack.
There's only one Steph Curry, you guys.
Up threes for 3 or 4 quarters gets redundant.
I mean, he didn't even come close, guys. Like, why? Why are we doing this?
I still have one more in the series where I will rank the eras from least favorite to favorite. Today, I finish up my series on the eras from the past 40 years by ranking them. If you haven't seen the 2 prior videos, I discussed the 1980s and 1990s, and then the 2000s and 2010s, grading them on the champions from that decade, the parity in the league during that time, and the prime players that made their mark during those years. So if you want to hear the complete breakdown of those eras, please check out those videos as the playlist link will be in the description of this video. But today I will rank them from my least favorite era to my favorite. Mostly going by my grades, but also going off my personal opinions on how exciting those years were and how much interest I had in the league during.
For me, 1, 2, 3, 20.
Those years. Won't hold you guys long, so let's rank the eras from 1980 through the 2010s. Number 4, even if I don't go by my scoring, just go to those videos to see my final score for the decade. This would likely still be my least favorite decade of the last 40 years. Like all beginnings of decades, it was an extension from the 2000s with teams like the super team Celtics, Lakers, and Spurs still atop of the heat. But then you had those Derrick Rose Bulls making waves. Paul George's
I love this era, man. I watched so much basketball whenever I had free time. I relished it.
OKC Thunder with 3 first ballot Hall of Famers in KD, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. And then when we got that heel turn by LeBron, pro wrestling term for turning against the fans, taking his talents to South Beach, it upped the must-watch factor for many, whether you were pro-Heat or anti-LeBron. It was a truly exciting time, and then we got the game changer in Stephen Curry and those Golden State Warriors who steamrolled the second half. Oh, you're talking
about the 2010s. My bad.
Decade, but made LeBron an underdog story in those years, shifting many of his haters to side with him as he attempted to stand up to a giant, David and Goliath style. In the end, we got prime LeBron through those years. Steph Curry changed the way the game is played, as almost any court you go to, everyone is jacking up threes from all over the court. A great new generation of talent like KD, Westbrook, Harden, Kawhi, Paul George, CP3, AD, and Giannis rising into their primes. Just thinking about it, yeah, the 2010s were some good times. It just was weaker than the other 3 decades, in my opinion. Number 3. These years were an extension of the 90s and a transition into the higher pace.
I'm curious if we get the same vote.
The league was looking for that next big megastar, and while they would definitely get it with LeBron James, those Cavs teams took a little while to get into a place to be contenders. In many ways, it was a very fun decade. Western wars between the Lakers and Spurs early in the decade, LeBron coming in and living up to the hype. International stars like Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Dirk Nowitzki, and Yao
I think we had some of the greatest rivalries of NBA history right here in this decade.
The stars and the first talked about super team with those 2008 Boston Celtics made it special.
Yeah, it did.
Now, I know if you're a fan of the channel, you're going to say I'm biased because the remaining decades were pretty much neck and neck when I graded them. However, I'll admit it, I'm slightly biased.
I am too.
So at number 2 are those crazy 80s.
All right, so we had the exact same vote. All right, cool.
Disagree with me because I know there's some younger fans that think the 80s were a bunch of plumbers and construction workers playing against a few superstars. But if you watched it back then, those games were high-scoring affairs, hard-hitting, and exciting. Yeah. The Showtime Lakers can be described
which is pretty cool because they had the defense like crazy back then, but the pace of play was also still up. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that are even older than me, like maybe in their 50s, that think that the 80s was the peak. And I guess I can understand that because, at that point you had the defense and you had the higher scoring. So if that's the balance the NBA has been looking for, maybe we had it, but then we just needed to ease up on the flagrant foul. We needed to create the flagrant foul. Essentially, that's all that needed to change. The fouling was too violent to be basketball, and but yeah. Anyways, that's my whole thought on there. I would understand it. Someone who's 10 years older than me voting the 80s being the best era. I get it.
Flashier version of the Steph Warriors. They just had talent everywhere on the court and made teams look like amateurs when Magic Johnson would do his thing as the floor general. Then you had the Larry Bird Celtics that were just as talented, a little less flashy, but were just a well-oiled machine. And Larry Bird was doing a lot of the things we praised Nikola Jokic for doing with his passing ability, floor vision, and ability to scorch defenders almost anywhere from the 3 to mid-range. Bad Boy Pistons became must-watch because unless you were from Detroit, you literally couldn't stand guys like Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn basically tackling your favorite players. Of course, this was a decade where young Michael Jordan wowed fans and really brought in a huge set of eyes to the game with just how dominant he could be. Of course, slower than what we see today, the games and the players just showed a fundamental skill level you don't always see today due to how fast-paced games are. Not to mention such great names.
And if you think about like the stars of that era, they all played completely different than each other. You can't say Dr. J played like Magic. You can't say Magic played like Bird or Dr. J. Like all the Isaiah was completely unique. Barkley was unique. Jordan was unique. Dominique was unique. Everybody was completely unique in their play style. Kareem was unique.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Alex English, Barkley, Dominique Wilkins, and Hakeem Olajuwon making their marks. The 80s had some great basketball and drama-filled series that you had to be there to really enjoy.
Yeah, there's Isaiah choking, from behind, choking him, pulling him, while Laimbeer's punching him in the face. Man, that was the 80s. Damn.
And of course, number one, the 90s.
We already won.
All biases aside, this decade felt like the one that really catapulted the NBA into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
More and more media crossovers, players in movies and television. I think once Jordan and those Bulls got to the mountaintop, it just made the game soar to new heights. I mean, it had to be a lucrative time for the association with trading cards.
No, I will not play that game, you guys. I wouldn't want to play this game ever again. I rented it once as a kid, and I returned it after one day. It was that bad. It was the worst game ever.
Jerseys all being major movers. While there will be many that complain that the decade was marred a little bit by the Bulls being so dominant and the fact that there were multiple expansion teams just really getting going in those days.
Yeah, playoff team by the late 90s.
The teams were weak and had to work through the draft, and some teams were depleted with the talent having to be spread throughout. We still got some classic battles between those Bulls and the Ewing Knicks, Reggie Miller's Pacers, and later the Magic with Shaq and Penny, Hakeem and those Rockets being beasts, the Malone and Stockton duo in Utah, Sean Kent being a big problem in the paint, the 1992 Dream Team being an iconic moment in itself, teaming guys like Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and the other stars in a, no pun intended, dream combination. We even saw NBA players in pro wrestling. Barkley in his
Godzilla,
prime,
baby.
Shaq showing how dominant a big really could be. The wild tactics of Dennis Rodman. It was just as much entertainment as it was sport. And I was glued for each marquee game. So there you have it. My rankings of the eras of the last 40 years. Do y'all agree or disagree? How would you rank those decades yourself? Let me know in the comments section.
I mean, the irony is I actually agree. So I wasn't so sure how this was going to play out, but we actually had the exact same votes. 90s being the first, 80s being the second, 2000s being the third, and 2010s being the fourth. The only one that was in my head that's like it's difficult for me is I gotta say I enjoyed the 2000s as much as I enjoyed the 80s as a fan, but I would be willing to say easily the 80s were more important for what it did for the game of basketball. But I had to actually think about that one. Like in my heart of hearts, like it's a close race because I really do cherish the 2000s basketball, and I thought I wouldn't because Jordan left the game, but then we had all these other guys coming in that just absolutely kept me glued. You know, people who don't get shout outs enough, like your Paul Pierces and your Allen Iversons Melo coming into the game, Duncan, Kobe, Shaq, all these guys. Like, it's so many to list that, Steve Nash was my guy, Dwayne Wade. I was so excited to watch this era of basketball. Shaq still, I think it was great. So that's my vote. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Where are your priorities when it comes to the greatest eras of basketball? Very curious. And if you wouldn't mind, put your general age in there. You don't have to, if you don't feel comfortable, don't put your exact age, but let me know. You in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s? Like, how old range are you? And put that in with your vote as far as which era you thought was the best and what you thought was the worst. I'm very curious to see if you guys line up with me or if it's different, and there's only one way to do that, so be honest in the comments. All right, you guys? All right, I'm out of here. Like the vid on the way out if you could. Hit that subscribe button if you want more content like this, and most importantly is to be water, my friends. Peace out.